You are listening to the Atlanta Sports Podcast, the only podcast covering all of your teams. Bringing you the best sports news from the state of Georgia, from the professional ranks to the high school levels, we have it all. We are now joined by Lee Miller, owner of Elite Hoops Basketball, the largest Nike basketball camp company in the Southeast. Lee, thanks for joining us once again today.
Sure thing. I appreciate you guys having me back on.
So with the GHSA State Playoffs, the better venues this year, how much of an impact do you think that made versus last year's incidents in Macon?
Oh, yeah, I think it was a huge change, unbelievable move for Georgia high school basketball to move here. There was just so many issues down there at Macon. And for them to move to Georgia and Georgia Tech, that's where the tournament should be. While I think having the games in Athens really hurt in terms of Wednesday and Thursday and some of the early times, obviously being closer to Atlanta and Friday and Saturday helped out the Tech crowds. You know, one thing I think that they should do, my one piece of advice would be to keep them at Georgia and Georgia Tech and have them both Friday and Saturday. I've sort of looked at it, and I think you can alternate. You know, maybe the girls are at Georgia Tech on Friday and Saturday one year, and the guys are at Georgia that same year. You have a 4, 6, and 8 p.m. game on Friday, enough where people have to take off a little bit early, but maybe not too early. And then you have the 12, 2, 4, 6, and 8 Saturday, similar to what they had earlier. And I really think, talking to both guys and girls coaches, most of them would prefer to sit there and watch 2, 4, 5, 6 games of their own gender. You know, if you're a varsity girls coach, you'd probably prefer to watch 2 or 3 straight girls state championships at different levels versus watching a guys team who you haven't really followed throughout the year. And obviously the same would be true with boys. So I think if they split them up, did something like that, still, confirmed to having them in nice arenas like that. But girls could play at Georgia Tech Friday, Saturday, and guys could play in Georgia Friday, Saturday. I think that would alleviate the final couple things that some coaches have expressed to me.
Were there any surprising early exits across all classifications?
Yeah, I think if you look at the high school tournament this year, obviously with having, really 8 tournaments this year, obviously with GHSA, the way they have it now, with public and private, there's 8 tournaments in there. There was some early exits. Much was talked about with Westlake and Pebblebrook and Wheeler and the way that they had been playing in their region. So it was really surprising to see none of those teams. So instead of just saying one team, it was really surprising to, in 7A, not have any of those teams. Ended up Grayson, Norcross, McEachern, and Tift, and not one of those 3 heralded teams ended up. So I would say all 3 of those, Pebblebrook, Wheeler, and Westlake. That would be the early upsets, that not even one of them made it to the Final Four.
So which team surprised you by making it as far as they did?
Yeah, that's a really good one, because as you go through the brackets and you look down, obviously it's seeded a little bit different. You can be a 2 seed, but still be a pretty good team because there's only 1 through 4 seeds. So the one that surprised me even for making the tournament was Dawson County High School. They're a program way up north that they lost one of their best players last year, 6'8", 6'9" post player who transferred back to South Carolina to be a homeschool student since they wouldn't allow him to play here. Last year they were, I think, below 500 in region, didn't make the state tournament. They lose their best player, and then they come back, and I think they're maybe 7-5 in region and get a first-round bid. Now, obviously, a bad thing for them is they played Pace Academy with number 1 player in the country, Wendell Carter. That was bad for them, but they didn't make a deep run. But for a team like Dawson to even make it in the state tournament, that was just a great thing for their coach and for their program up there.
Which individual players impressed you the most during the playoffs?
Yeah, that's hands down. Buford's point guard, Isaiah, he just did an amazing job for them. Obviously led that Buford title to their first title under Eddie Martin, who's just done an amazing job. He won 3 at Norcross, 3 at Greater Atlantic Christian, and now in his second year up at Buford wins the title up there. But Strong, heady point guard who plays the game the right way. Unbelievable basketball IQ. Now, obviously, his skill set is Division I level. His basketball IQ is right there with him. He just made some of the plays and some of the reads and some of the things Coach Martin was calling from the bench. He's just got a D1 basketball mentality. So he was by far a standout player for me. I look at things like that versus how many points and rebounds the kid has. Is he playing at a top-notch mental level? And he obviously did that for Buford and led them to a state title.
Which players were the biggest disappointments?
Yeah, that's one I try not to touch on too much, actually, which players are, because, as much as we brag on some players for having a high level, these are, some of these kids are still 15, 16, 17 years old. But to be the biggest one to me, going back to that unbelievable region out there in Cobb would probably have to be Pebblebrook. They were heralded nationally ranked, and obviously Colin Sexton, an unbelievable player going to Alabama, and for them to lose that Elite Eight game to Norcross by 22 was really surprising to me. Obviously, we've worked with Norcross and trained them, and love for them to win by 22. But that's one that if you look at what most people probably marked off, Pebblebrook has beaten them in the past couple tournaments, and I think that's one that people probably penciled in. Thought Colin would go for 30 points and Pebblebrook would win by 5 or 10. So for Pebblebrook to lose to Norcross in that elite game by 22 was really surprising to me.
So you mentioned Elite Hoops does train Norcross. What are some other teams that you train that made the playoffs?
Yeah, they have a couple other teams this year that made it in the state tournament. One we were really impressed with was the Lovett Lions. They had an incredible run this year, went further than anybody thought. They had an incredible game in the state tournament where they beat GAC at GAC, in which their guard Ryan just lit everybody up. And just got some sad news on him, and that he's transferring to a prep school up in the Northeast. So we'll obviously miss Ryan Greer, and appreciate the time we were able to work with him. So Lovett did an amazing job. Obviously, we worked with GAC as well. St. Pius was one. We've been training them for a number of years. They made it all the way to the state championship game where they lost a nail-biter by 5 points to Upson Lee. Unbelievable game, unbelievable crowd to be a part of. St. Francis, another team that we train out of Alpharetta, Georgia. They are in the single A private. They lost to the eventual championship champion Green Forest, who is just, Green Forest throws 7-foot Division I guys at you left and right. So they lost by 30 in the Final Four. But Green Forest in that tournament, that single A private, they won by an average of like 33 points in that tournament, fellas. So to lose to them by that in the Final Four was still pretty impressive for St. Francis. St. Francis has 2 really good young guys, Dwan Odom and Chase Ellis, who I believe were either second and third or first and second on their team this year in scoring. So that's a team to watch out in the coming years for them. Another one who did amazing for us was Grayson, the Grayson Rams. Coach George Pierce did an amazing job with his program. Last year was our first year training them. They made it to the state tournament for the first time ever. This year they made it again. And this year they actually had to match up. It was a really tough one for us to watch. They had to match up against Norcross in the Final Four out there at West Georgia on that Saturday afternoon, and they lost a tough one. It was close early, but Grayson ended up losing by 19 points there to Norcross. So those are a couple of teams that we've worked with. There's a couple others that we trained throughout the year, but those are the ones that I think were probably the most impressive for us in the state tournament.
So what was the difference between the public and the private schools in the high school basketball tournament? Well,
obviously the private schools are in classes 1 through 4. Public runs all the way up to 7A. But in terms of play, much has been said about transfers, people transferring from one to the other. And you know what? You see it both ways. The bottom line is you see a lot of kids transfer to private schools, and they obviously have some things to offer sometimes. But it's just as easy these days to transfer to a public school with GHSA regulations. So while the public schools do have the advantage of playing in classes 5, 6, and 7, which I do not believe there are any private schools in, for the most part, if you match up private versus public and state champions, I think they're all high-level teams. As I mentioned, Green Forest, who won the single A private, their only 2 losses in the state of Georgia this year were to Norcross and to Pebblebrook. two unbelievable 6 or 7A teams. So when you look at the landscape of public and private, it really just depends more on the program versus the class. But there's really bad public schools, there's really bad private schools, there's really good public schools, and there's really good private schools. So it just depends on the class you're in and the program.
So we're going to switch gears for a minute. There was a retirement atop GHSA. Gary Phillips was retired, is a nice way of putting it. What are your thoughts as to that situation up there?
The GHSA has a lot of work to do to be the type of organization that they need to be to support Georgia high school athletics in the way that they should be supported and the way they should be managed. That being said, as much of an improvement as there could be for an organization to run, I am 100% confident that the state of Georgia and any government agency running the group of high schools, obviously would no longer be the GHSA, but running the high school program would be ultimately worse. Any government should not be running a high school program. I really think it should be its own organized body. I think someone needs to step up to the table and create a new organization or have new leadership. So while it is a little disconcerting that they can somewhat force a leader out, I think that there is needed to be a change at the top of GHSA.
And how do you think college coaches can keep all this in-state talent that we see in the tournaments for GHSA? How do you think they can keep it at home?
Yeah, the talent here is absolutely amazing. I mean, per capita, this has to be one of the top states, top 2 or 3 states. But, guys, if you look at the class from this year, I mean, obviously, as we talked about, Mr. Carter, who played at Pace, he's going to Duke. Colin Sexton's going to Alabama. Okeke from Westlake's going to Auburn. Alex O'Connell from Milton's going to Duke. Davian Mitchell's going to Auburn. Rayshawn Hammond's one of the guys who trained at Norcross. He's going to Georgia. He's really the only guy in that top 25 that's going to a state school. Coach Eric, when I was up at Georgia, did an unbelievable job of putting a fence around Metro Atlanta and Georgia and just getting those players here. And that's a huge thing. I really think whether it's Georgia or Georgia Tech, if on a consistent basis, they don't have to get all of them. They need to get 2 out of the top 25 guys every year. If they can get 2 out of the top 25 guys every year out of Georgia, I think both teams put themselves in the place where they need to be to get an NCAA tournament bid every single year. And all that is getting 2 out of the top 25. The years you can get 3 or 4, then obviously you can compete and be in the Sweet 16. But that's something that both Georgia and Georgia Tech have to do in order to be really successful programs. Unbelievable state. They have resources right in the backyard. They really need to do a much better job of locking those in.
All right, Lee, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, I appreciate you guys having me on. I love talking hoops. Obviously, I'm near and dear to Georgia high school basketball, and look forward to talking hoops again with you guys soon.